Hi there. In the previous videos, we learned how to work with the border and padding. In this video, we're going to learn about margins. So let's start. So right now, you see a yellow block with a border and some text. To create it in HTML, we added a div with class A and added a p tag to it with some text. And in CSS, we specified the height and width for the div. And for the class, we specified the background color to be yellow and the border 5 pixels solid black. And that's what we got on the screen. So in the previous video, we learned how to control the distance between the content of the block and its border. And we did this by using the padding property. So if we add padding 10 pixels, for example, we create a certain space on the inside of the borders that the content of the block can't go into. And in our example, this space is 10 pixels, as we specified it to be. And let's add to our HTML a p tag with some more text. And we'll also add float left for our div. And this way we get something like this. As you see, the text surrounds our block, because we specified float left for it. And also, as you see, the text is right up against the block itself without any space between. And therefore, some of the text will be a little uncomfortable to read. So how can we specify a distance between our block and that text? Well, for that we got a property called margin. So let's add margin 10 pixels and see what happens. As you see, now we got some spacing surrounding our block from all the sides. This spacing has a width of 10 pixels. So that's basically what the margin does. Is it possible to specify a margin but only for one side of the block? Of course it is. The same way we did it with the padding properties. So for that, we use top, bottom, right and left. So if we write, for example, margin right 30 pixels, we're going to have a margin of 30 pixels specifically for the right side. This way, everywhere but the right side, we have 10 pixels. But the 10 pixels that was set for the right side gets overwritten with the 30 pixels that we have just specified. Okay, so if we write margin and then just one number, this is the margin that is going to be applied on all sides of the block. And if we have 4 values, then we'll be setting the margin for each side individually, starting from the top and going clockwise. So in this example, 10 pixels will go on top, 20 on the right, 30 on the bottom, and 10 on the left. So the margins are going to end up looking like this. And say if we have only 2 values, then the first one, 30 pixels, is for the top and bottom margins, and the second one, 10 pixels, is for the left and right. And finally, the last option is when we have 3 values, 10, 30 and 20 for example. Then we'll have 10 on top, 20 below, and then left and right is going to be 30 pixels. So it's exactly the same as it was with the padding. Alright, so let's try to do these with some real examples. Here we have a div with class block and with the text hello. Then in CSS we set the width 200 pixels, height 200 pixels, background color orange, and color, then font size, and border of 5 pixels solid. Now let's also add a paragraph with the lorem text. And currently, this text is below the block. So let's have it wrapped around our block. For that, we just need to add float left. And there it is. As you see, the text is touching the edge of the block. So let's add a bit more text. Let's add even more text to it. And now you see how it wraps around the block, and even from below, it's almost up against the edge of the block. So right now, it doesn't look the best as it is, right? To add spacing between our block and the text, we're going to add the margin property. And say we only want a margin on the right side, so we're going to write margin right about 15 pixels. Let's see. And there's our margin on the right side. If we want the margin to be on all sides, we're just going to write margin 15 pixels. Okay, so let's see how that's going to be different. Now we got 15 pixels on all sides. Here, 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 and here. We can also add a second value, 30 pixels for example. So this way, 15 is going to be on top and bottom, and 30 pixels is going to be on the left and right side. See? There it is. And say if I add a third value, say 0, then I'm going to have 15 on top, 0 on bottom, and 30 on left and right. Refresh. You see? And we just got rid of the bottom margin. And finally, I'm going to add a fourth value, say 50 pixels. Let's see what that does. Alright, refresh. And as you see, the last parameter is the margin on the left. So 15 on top, 30 on the right, 0 down here, and 50 on the left side. Okay, great. Now instead of our text, let's add another div. Div with class block 2, for example. So remove the text and create this block. Now let's add some styles for block 2. Width also 200 pixels, as well as for the height. But the color is going to be blue, for example. Also add a yellow border, so 5 pixels, solid yellow. Alright, let's take a look and see what we have now. And indeed, we have this blue block with a yellow border, but it's currently behind our first block. Now why is that? Well, that's because we wrote float left for the first block. So let's just remove that. And now it's on the bottom. Let's also remove the margins we set before. Okay, good. Now they're neatly stacked one on top of the other. And now if for the first block we write margin bottom 20 pixels. What will happen? Once again, we will get 20 pixels of space on the bottom and the second block is going to move down. You see? Just like that. And also, we can even set negative margins. What does that mean? That means that if, for example, set this to minus 20 pixels, then this block here isn't going to shift down 20 pixels, but is going up and taking up the block space. Let's check it out. You see, the blue block drove into the orange block and took up some of its space. So margins can also be negative, as you've just seen. Let's bring this back to positive. So let's also consider the following situation. For block 2, let's add margin top 20 pixels. And what do we expect to happen? We expect that down here we will have 20 pixels, and then above block 2, another 20 pixels. So together that's going to make 40. However, if we refresh the page, then we see that nothing changed. Now why is that? That's because margins account for one another. So since there is already 20 pixels, block 2 counts that towards its margin as well. But say we add 30 pixels here, then it's going to increase to 30 pixels. And this smaller margin, the 20 pixels, is not going to work, of course. And the last thing we're going to look at is using margins to center a block on a page. One of the more problematic tasks of CSS is to get a block centered. So margins can actually help us with that. How do we do that? Well, say we want our first block to be right in the center of the page horizontally. For that, we can add margin left with a special value called auto, and then margin right also with the same special value auto. Now let's see what changes. As you see, it's right in the center. No matter how I change the window size, if I make it larger and smaller, it still stays in the center. This is one of the most common uses of the margin property, but of course, they don't write it like this. They actually use a more efficient way. They just write margin 0 vertically, or whatever else you want vertically. And then horizontally, we just write auto. And this is going to work the same way as you see. So the first value we could also change to something else, say something like 50 pixels. Now we have an additional space on top and bottom, the 50 pixels. And we could actually add a third value for the bottom, say 60 pixels. But in either case, we need left and right to be auto. Alright, so that's it for this topic. I'll see you in the next video.